She used my name. That's what I kept thinking when I sat at the kitchen table that Tuesday morning, staring at the letter in my hands. She had used my name, my credit, my signature, and she had smiled while doing it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Lauren. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years teaching 4th grade in Columbus, Ohio, and I retired the spring before my husband Gerald passed. That was 3 years ago now. 3 years that feel like a different lifetime. Like a version of me that still believed the people sitting at her dinner table loved her. Gerald died in April. A heart attack, the doctors said. Like that explained anything. Like a word could account for the empty side of the bed, the coffee mug I kept washing out of habit, the chair at the table where nobody sat anymore. We had been married 40 years. We had raised our son Marcus together, given him everything we could, worked overtime and skipped vacations, and drove old cars so he could go to a good school and have a good start. And he did. Marcus turned out fine. He really did. It was Diane I didn't see coming. Marcus married Diane 7 years ago. I tried. I want you to know that. I drove 4 hours to their engagement party. I helped plan the wedding, addressed envelopes by hand, stayed quiet when they chose a venue that was 2 hours from anyone in our family. I babysat their daughter Sophie when she was born. I stayed for 2 weeks and cooked and cleaned and got up at 3 in the morning so Diane could sleep. I did it because that's what you do. Because I loved Marcus. Because I wanted them to be happy. When Gerald died, Marcus was the one who drove up. He sat with me in the hospital waiting room, and then he held my hand in the hallway when the doctor came out with that look on his face. He was good in those days. He was still my son. It was Diane who suggested I sell the house. It happened slowly, the way most things that hurt you do. She brought it up once, casually, over dinner, about 4 months after the funeral. The house was too big, she said. Too much upkeep for one person, too much yard, too many stairs. She said it like she was worried about me, and I think I actually thanked her for the concern. She brought it up again at Christmas, then again in February. By spring, Marcus had joined in. They talked about how close I'd be to Sophie, how I wouldn't have to worry about the furnace or the gutters or shoveling the walk. They had a finished basement, they said, a whole separate entrance. I could have my privacy. I sold the house in June. I want you to understand what that house meant. Gerald and I bought it in 1987. We refinished the floors ourselves over a long weekend. We planted the maple tree in the backyard, the summer Marcus was 5. When I handed over the keys at closing, I stood in the empty kitchen for a minute and pressed my hand flat against the wall. I don't know why. It just felt like something I needed to do. I made $240,000 on the sale. We agreed, Marcus, Diane, and I, that I would keep the money in my savings account. My retirement account was separate, untouched. We talked about it at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, with Diane's laptop open and a spreadsheet on the screen. She said she had a financial background. She said she just wanted to help me make the most of it. I nodded and smiled and thought how lucky I was to have family who cared. I moved in on a Saturday. Marcus carried boxes. Sophie handed me a drawing she'd made of the 2 of us, stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a yellow sun overhead. I taped it to the wall in my room. I thought, this is going to be fine. This is going to be good. The first thing that changed was small. Diane asked if I could contribute to groceries. Of course, I said. I started handing her $200 a month in cash. Then it was $300, because food prices had gone up. Then she mentioned that my share of the utilities was more than she expected. I wrote a check. Then there was the internet bill. Then the water bill. Then something about property tax, her voice careful and apologetic, saying she hated to even bring it up. I brought it up once. Gently. I said I thought we'd agreed the basement apartment would be my contribution to the household. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has said something embarrassing at a party. She said she remembered it differently. She said Marcus had never meant for them to absorb all those costs. She said she was sure I understood. Marcus wasn't in the room. Marcus was often not in the room. The months went on. By that first winter, I had paid out almost $30,000. I told myself it was reasonable. I told myself it was temporary. I started a notebook where I wrote down every payment, the date, the amount, what it was for. I don't know why I started doing that. Maybe some part of me already knew. In February, Diane came downstairs with paperwork. She said it was for a home equity line of credit. She said they needed to do some work on the roof and the HVAC system, and the bank required a co-signer because of the way the deed was structured. She set the papers on my little kitchen table and put a pen on top of them. She said Marcus had already looked it over. She said it was just a formality. I asked to read it first. She said, of course, take all the time I needed. She'd be upstairs. But she said it the way people say things when they expect you to feel rushed. I read through it. The language was dense, and I was tired, and my reading glasses needed a new prescription. I saw my name. I saw a number. $60,000. I told myself it was for the roof. I told myself Marcus had already reviewed it. I signed. 3 weeks later, the roof was fine. Nothing was done to the roof. I didn't ask about it for another month, and when I did, Diane said the contractor had pushed the timeline back. She said it with her eyes on her phone. By summer, something had shifted in her. I can't explain it precisely. She became less careful about pretending. Little things at first. She stopped saying good morning when she came down to do laundry. She stopped knocking before she came into the storage area that connected to my bathroom. She said something in front of Sophie once that I didn't catch, but Sophie looked at me afterward with that particular quiet children have when they've heard something about you. I started keeping more to myself. I cooked in my small kitchen. I took walks in the morning, long ones, through the neighborhood. I called my friend Carol every Tuesday. Carol had known me for 30 years. She had watched me raise Marcus. She was the one who said quietly, "In that way she has, Lauren, are you sure everything is all right over there?" I told her I was fine. I told myself I was fine. In September, I checked my savings account online. The number I saw made me put my hand on the desk, made me sit very still. I blinked and looked again. Where I expected to see something close to $200,000, I saw $43,000. I clicked through the transaction history. Transfer, transfer, transfer. 7 transfers over 11 months, some labeled with my name, some with Marcus and Diane's joint account, one with a number I didn't recognize. I sat there for a long time. I didn't go upstairs that night. I didn't make dinner. I sat in the small chair by the window in my room and watched it get dark outside and tried to think clearly. I am a methodical person. 31 years of teaching will do that to you, I thought. Before I do anything, I need to know exactly what I am dealing with. I got up at 5 in the morning and I drove to the bank when it opened. The branch manager was a woman named Patrice. She was younger than my daughter-in-law, and she had kind eyes, and she did not make me feel foolish. I showed her my account history. I told her I hadn't authorized those transfers. She pulled up the account on her screen, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, carefully, that several of the transfers had been initiated with my online login credentials. She said someone with my password had moved the money. I had given Diane my password. She had asked for it nearly a year ago when I was having trouble navigating the bank's new website. She said she would just help me reset it. I had read her the numbers over the phone like it was nothing. I drove home and went downstairs without speaking to anyone. I sat at my kitchen table and I opened my notebook. I looked at every entry. $30,000 in cash payments, the co-signing on the line of credit, the transfers, my name on a document I hadn't fully read, $43,000 remaining of the $240,000 I had earned from selling the home Gerald and I built our life in. I did not cry. I want to tell you I did not cry. And I didn't. Not then. What I felt instead was very cold and very clear. The way the air feels in October right before the first frost. Everything still. Everything sharp. I called my friend Carol. Carol is the kind of person who listens without interrupting. I told her everything. All of it, in order. From the day Diane suggested I sell the house to the conversation with Patrice that morning. When I finished, Carol was quiet for a moment, and then she said, David was a family law and estate attorney in Cincinnati. Carol had mentioned him once, years ago. I had forgotten. I had his number by noon. I did not tell Marcus. I did not tell Diane. I told no one in that house. David and I spoke on the phone for an hour that first day, and then I drove to his office the following Thursday while Marcus was at work and Diane was at her sister's. I brought my notebook. I brought every bank statement I had saved. I brought the co-signing documents. David was a quiet man, steady, the kind who reads everything before he speaks. When he looked up from the paperwork, he said, You have more here than you probably realize. We met 4 times over the next 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, I went about my life as normally as I could. I cooked my meals. I took my walks. I was polite at dinner on the nights we ate together, which were fewer now. I asked Sophie about school. I watered the small plant on my windowsill. I called Carol every Tuesday. Inside, I was doing something I had never done in 64 years. I was building something in secret, quietly, while the people around me assumed I was simply waiting to disappear. David helped me do several things. He helped me understand that the electronic transfers, made using my login credentials without explicit written authorization, were potentially fraudulent. He helped me understand that the co-signing document I had signed entitled me to certain protections if the line of credit was used for non-disclosed purposes. He helped me draft a certified letter, and he helped me set up a new account at a different bank, one no one in that house knew about, and he helped me understand exactly which remaining funds were legally and unambiguously mine. I also made a phone call I should have made sooner. I called Marcus. Not in the house. I called him from my car, parked 3 streets over, on a cold Thursday morning. I told him what I had found. I told him about the transfers. I said his wife had my password and the money had moved in ways I hadn't authorized. There was a long silence on the other end. And then Marcus said, Mom, you said you were okay with helping us out. I sat with that for a moment. With the amounts I agreed to, I said, not all of it. He said he'd have to talk to Diane. He said it in a voice I didn't recognize, careful, rehearsed, like he'd already talked to Diane. Like maybe they had already anticipated this conversation and decided what he would say. I said, Okay, Marcus. You do that. I drove home. I went downstairs. And the next morning, Diane came down. It was early. 6:15. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee, looking out the small window at the backyard. She came in without knocking. She had stopped knocking entirely by then, and she poured herself a glass of water, and she stood at my counter, and she looked at me the way she'd been looking at me for months, that particular look that meant she had already decided what I was worth. She said, Marcus told me you've been going through the accounts. I said, I have. She said, You're confused about how some of this works. You always said you wanted to help the family. I said, I remember what I said. She put the glass down. And then she said, and I will remember this for the rest of my life, she said, You're 64 years old and you have $40,000 to your name. What exactly do you think you're going to do? She said it without raising her voice. She said it the way you say something you've been waiting to say for a long time, like it was almost a relief to finally get it out. And she looked at me, and she waited. I looked back at her. I've already done it, I said. She didn't understand what I meant. I could see that. She was waiting for me to cry or argue or beg. I didn't do any of those things. I picked up my coffee mug and I took a sip, and I looked out the window at the backyard. After a moment, she left. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived at the house, addressed to Marcus and Diane jointly. David had sent it through his office. I had signed the authorization the week before. I was not there when they opened it. I had timed it deliberately. I was at Carol's house, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, when Marcus called my cell phone. He called 4 times in a row. On the 5th call I picked up, he said, "There's a letter here from an attorney." "I know," I said. The letter outlined, in the particular language lawyers use, the nature of the unauthorized transfers, the co-signing irregularities, and the legal remedies available to me. It requested the return of a specific sum within 30 days. It was not aggressive. David had been careful about but it was clear, it was precise. It had numbers in it and dates, and it had my name at the bottom, not as someone asking for help, but as someone who knew exactly where she stood. Marcus said, "Mom, you didn't have to do this." "I know," I said. "I chose to." He asked if we could talk about it. I said we could talk about it through David's office. I said I thought that was better for everyone, because things needed to be in writing from here on. There was a long pause. I heard him breathing on the other end. He said, "I have a plan," I said. And then I said goodbye, and I set my phone on Carol's table, and I looked out her kitchen window at the tree in her yard, and I did not cry. I felt something instead that I hadn't felt in 3 years. Something that had been there once and then gone away so slowly I hadn't noticed until it was completely gone. I felt like myself again. The apartment I had found was in a building 12 minutes from Carol's house, 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms, which felt extravagant. But David had helped me understand what money I could access and when, and it was manageable. The building had a community room where people played cards on Friday afternoons. There was a small garden on the south side that residents could use. The woman who showed me around was named Barbara, and she'd lived there 6 years, and she said she'd never had a problem with the parking. I moved out on a Saturday morning in March. Marcus came by. I don't know if Diane asked him to or if he came on his own. He stood in the doorway of the basement apartment while I carried boxes past him to the moving truck I'd rented. He said things. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known about all of it. He said Diane had handled most of the finances. He said he should have paid more attention. I listened to him say those things. I believed some of them. The thing about Marcus is that I know him. I know the sound of his voice when he means what he's saying, and I know the sound of it when he's managing me. That morning it was somewhere in between, which is probably the truest thing I can tell you about him. He was sorry enough to show up, not sorry enough to have prevented it. I hugged him at the door. He felt like my son in that moment, like the boy who used to fall asleep in the car and have to be carried inside. I held on for a second, and then I stepped back. Sophie was standing in the hallway behind him. She was holding the drawing she'd made when I moved in the 2 stick figures in front of the house with the yellow sun. She had kept it all this time. She held it out to me. I took it and I folded it carefully, and I put it in the box in my arms. "I'll call you on Tuesdays," I told her. "You can tell me about school." She nodded. She had her father's eyes. My apartment faces east. I didn't plan that. But every morning the light comes through the kitchen window and lands on the table, and I sit with my coffee and I watch it move. I've started a small herb garden on the windowsill, parsley and thyme and basil, all in a row. I bought new reading glasses. I have been to the community card games 3 times. I lost twice and won once, and I plan to go again. The legal matter was settled quietly. I will not tell you every detail because some of it is still in process, and David has advised me to be careful. But I will tell you this: the certified letter worked. Diane is not stupid. She understood what exposure looked like. I did not get everything back. I need to be honest with you about that. Some of what was taken is gone in ways that are difficult to recover. But I have enough. I have my retirement account, untouched. I have the new account that Diane never knew about. I have the agreement, in writing, and David has a copy. And I have the Tuesday calls with Sophie, which are my favorite part of the week. Here is what I know now that I wish I had known sooner. I know that kindness and trust are not the same thing. I was kind for years before I understood that. I gave and told myself that was love. It was love, some of it, but some of it was fear of being difficult, fear of needing too much, fear of that particular look that says you're a burden. I am 64 years old, and I am not a burden. I am a person with a history and a mind and a right to every single dollar I earned across 31 years in a classroom. Nobody gets to smile and say otherwise. If you are reading this, if you are sitting somewhere in a house that doesn't feel entirely like yours, if you are handing money to people who treat it like it was always theirs, if you have been told, directly or in ways that are harder to name, that your best years are behind you and you should be grateful for what you're given, I want you to hear me. You are not behind. You are not finished. You do not have to be loud or angry or dramatic. You do not have to make a scene. You just have to be methodical. Write it down. Get a notebook. Call the bank. Find a David. And in the meantime, keep the notebook somewhere they won't look. I have mine still. It's sitting on the shelf in my new apartment. Between a book of crossword puzzles and the photograph of Gerald and me at Niagara Falls, the one from 1994 where his sunglasses are crooked and I'm laughing at something, he said, I don't need the notebook anymore. Not for its original purpose. But I keep it there, anyway. It reminds me of the morning I sat at that kitchen table with my coffee and looked out the window and felt the frost in the air and thought, I know exactly where I stand. That was the morning everything changed. Not because I raised my voice or made demands or turned into someone I wasn't, but because I stopped waiting for someone else to decide what I was worth, and I decided for myself, and I have not stopped deciding since.